Wonderful message. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the August All Conversation session. I'm Amanda Lamont, and today I am delighted to introduce two fabulous women to run through our conversation, Jamie Morgan-Besset and Tammy Myles. Before I let Jamie take the reins, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all live and work, and specifically the Wurundjeri people who have taken such good care of the Dandenong Ranges, which is where I'm dialing in from today. I would also like to just acknowledge the incredibly difficult, challenging week that it's been for people around the world, not only in Australia and New Zealand, and the lockdowns that we are coming and going from, but also waking up to the news about the earthquake in Haiti on Sunday, and then the subsequent storm, and of course the chaos in Afghanistan that we're seeing on the news every day, which is incredibly challenging and confronting, I'm sure, for all of us. So just very mindful of the week that it's been for us in a challenging time, and noting that that's something that's hot on the heels of the IPCC report as well. So there's a lot going on. So just my wish for you all is that you're looking after yourselves and connecting in as best you can in these times. And it's so great that we have an opportunity for us all to come together like we are now, even though we're faces on a screen. I know that our hearts and minds are all connected with each other. So with that, thanks for joining. Enjoy the session today. Thank you so much, Tammy, for coming along, and Jamie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And following on from Amanda, I also just wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which I work and live on today. I'm coming from the lands of the Yagara and the Turrbal people here in Meanjin, also known as Brisbane. And I wish to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. I have the wonderful, delightful job today to showcase the wonderful talent and incredible women from Queensland. And today I get the pleasure of introducing you to Tammy Myles. If you'll allow me a moment just to read a little bit about Tammy. Tammy is the Executive Director for Community Recovery at the Department of Communities, Housing and the Digital Economy in Queensland. Tammy is a senior management professional with more than 20 years experience in the human services industry. And during this time, Tammy's actually worked across the non-government sector as well as in local and state government positions. And throughout her career, she's taken the opportunity to work both in a regional service delivery as well as the central office locations. So she has a breadth of experience across procurement, contracting, child safety, disability services, disaster management. I mean, the list goes on, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So she's been in her current role and with the department in all of its iterations for over 17 years, delivering and supporting and coordinating the human and social recovery services at either a regional or a state level. So, yeah, she's been very busy, given Queensland's one of the most disaster-prone states in this country. Again, this experience has included the large scale, and speaking of those disasters, has included the responses to the natural disasters of significant floods, cyclones, storms, and at times just dealing with the human and social consequences of those biosecurity outbreak, extreme acts of violence or tragic incidences and accidents that include supporting Australians returning from international incidences. So I am just chuffed to bits to welcome you all and welcome Tammy and say thank you so much for joining us, Tammy.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated, Jamie.
And I really want to kick the conversation off, and maybe Tammy, I would be grateful. I mean, I know all about you and it's wonderful, but if you could share a little bit about your background and how did you get to where you are? Paint the picture. How did you get to where you are today?
All right. I'll try to do that. Noting, I'm sure, as many of you online would know, it's often the hardest to actually talk about yourself than any other topic. So as you said, I've pretty much worked in human services my entire career. I started in the non-government sector, primarily in community development and Nedwood Centre coordination roles. From there, I then moved into local government and again worked in the community services area and from there moved into state government. As you said, across the last 17 odd years, which seems like a lot when you say it, but it feels like it's gone in seconds. I have had a variety of experiences and opportunities, and very soon after joining state government was actually my first disaster. I started in Central Queensland, and in my business as usual role, I worked in kind of the sector development, youth affairs type of area, but was deployed out to a rural community who had a significant flood event. My introduction to disasters was I was met by a person who was meant to be coming up and training us that day. At the airport, he gave me a couple of grant application forms and a little folder and put me on a plane and said, "You'll be all right." I guess it is a remarkable difference of where we find ourselves many years down the track. When I was thinking about this, I reflected and thought, little did I realise at that point how disasters would become such a passion, and how that experience would actually shape my interest and, I guess, awareness of what was needed in this space. I stayed working in regional areas for a couple of years, and during that time, again, was sent by the department to respond to a variety of disasters, both natural hazards, industry closures, impacts to citrus industries, and a whole range of other factors. I then transferred to Brisbane, and while I was down here, again, as part of my business as usual role, I still was responsible for looking after disasters, and got to do an actual disaster response here in Brisbane. And from there, I guess my experience has just continued to grow. Now, I guess there's a whole range of different roles and positions I went into, and I think each of those created an opportunity to learn new skills, to connect with new people. And from a disaster management point of view, was once I came to Brisbane, I started to be exposed more to some of probably the professional development opportunities. So I think some of you online would remember the old AAMI, so the old Australian Emergency Management Institute. I was really fortunate to get the opportunity to go down and do some of the courses there, and the information was important, but what was even more critical, I think, was creating the connections and networks and hearing from others about their experience in responding to different types of disasters, and to understand that each of us had different disaster management arrangements in our different locations. And I guess it was some of the, I like how they did that. I can bring that back and put that into practice in my space. From my role in regions, in the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to come into central office to take on the disaster management role. At that point in Queensland, for human and social recovery, we had one person who was responsible for responding to those disasters. And I was the fortunate person who got to come act in that role. Two really important learning opportunities happened in my first couple of weeks in that role. The first was my first week, the State Disaster Coordination Group that I became part of in that role decided to do a shared training for the whole group in the Australian Incident Management Arrangements, which becomes critical when I hit my second week, which was when Tropical Cyclone Larry hit. And I guess the learning I'd had from the AIMS training really positioned me to be able to pitch and brief my senior executives on what we needed to put in place to deliver good recovery supports and services, given we only had the one role and position at the time. I guess the really important part around that was not just the learning, but that really bonded us as a group, and I think became a really important network, particularly to me, who was new to this space, and really some of the more senior members of that group took me under their wing. At that point, I was also, I think, either the only one or maybe one of two women who actually were in, that kind of role at the time. The experience I had, I think, in the years leading up to and post that, where my department was giving me opportunities to act in different roles and positions, also helped, I guess, shape my knowledge of the difference between management and leadership, and to understand a lot about working in different contexts. As Jamie was explaining, in my career, I have been fortunate enough to work in most of the different areas within the multiple versions of our agencies, and that and in many different communities and locations, which really helped shape, I guess, my understanding of context and again, the importance of networks and really learning from those who have had the experience locally and in leading other events. When Cyclone Larry hit, it was an immense learning opportunity on multiple levels. It was kind of quite an empowering opportunity in terms of the confidence, I guess, my senior leadership at the time had in me, but was equally terrifying given we hadn't had such a big disaster here. What became critical to me at that point was some of the networks and connections I had created through those visits to the Australian Institute of Emergency Management, because one of the key things that occurred in Larry was the wonderful support and guidance I got from people like Andrew Coughlin from Red Cross, from Chris and Sandy, who had led the Canberra bushfire response that was a couple of years before Larry. And they offered that wisdom, to us based on their experience, and really helped us shape, both here in Brisbane, but also on the ground, what structures and processes and what things we need to be thinking forward, about. So I guess from, if there was one thing I could offer to you, it would be really the importance of those connections and those relationships, and really leaning in and learning from others and their experiences of disasters. Moving on from then, I again came in and out of community recovery for a few years. Worked here in community recovery for a little while, built the team from one person to a small team. Was also fortunate enough to be able to secure resources to get a few positions in regional locations around the state, which really did become very important, because not long after that is when Queensland started to really see increasing numbers and severity of scale of the disasters happening here. I then again decided to go off on my leadership journey and went back out and was doing various regional director roles, and then came back in centrally to kind of lead some program management roles. And again, in all of those opportunities, I really, saw the importance of, from working in one area, how that knowledge and those networks really helped me in the next role. So again, just continue to reiterate just how important that is. I think when I was here in central office, one of the other really critical, pathways for me was, as the director here, I became a member of the National Social Recovery group, which most of you would now know as the SSRG. And this is a forum of all of the jurisdictions, including New Zealand, who come together to really look at national consistency and how we can all contribute to improving policies and practices across jurisdictions. Again, as a relatively young newcomer to that space, I was offered very generously by some of my colleagues like Ronnie Fagata and Wendy Graham, the wisdom of their experience and their knowledge, and the generosity of shared resources and tools. So I think again, making sure you tap into important forums and networks, indeed very much like the one we're on today, because they will become really important as part of your development and career pathways. It isn't all about experience and networks, though. I think along the way I also had to commit to my own personal and professional development, and made sure I went and undertook both emergency management and other university and TAFE courses that would really strengthen my knowledge, my experience, and I guess my thirst for wanting to know how else others approach things. So, and I think long and short is I then came back in from Regions in around 2015, and I've been back here in Community Recovery Unit heading up this space for a few years now.
That is such an incredible experience so far. I mean, I acknowledge that, your passion still burns and you're still wanting to make a contribution to, the safety and security of Queenslanders, and then using that experience. I feel with your sitting on the SRRG, again, Queensland's very disaster prone, is sharing that experience, knowledge and hard fought wisdom as a practitioner and as a leader in the space with other jurisdictions who might be going through the disaster for the very first time. And what struck me as you were articulating your experience was how important those networks are. I think, though, I don't want to, it kind of goes without saying, though, Tammy, in my mind, for people who are in hierarchical leadership positions, there is sometimes that need to, there has sometimes in the past been the need to, oh yes, I know all the answers and I have all the solutions. And what's becoming really apparent as we move through these really unique experiences, right, that it's actually important to say, I don't have all the answers, but that's okay. But I'm going to leverage my networks, my relationships, and those with that lived experience, those with that hard fought wisdom to kind of I guess, build the plane as we're flying it, right? So I wonder if you could talk more around some of the networks that exist in Queensland that you've also drawn upon in your own ways that have supported a little bit.
Yes, certainly. So I think there's a variety of networks that I draw on, both from a work and personal context. Within the work environment, it is, as I said, things like the State Disaster Coordination Group, our Functional Recovery Group. So in Queensland we have 5 standing functional recovery groups, and we make it a practice every month to come together, just over coffee, to shoot the breeze, to kind of keep that connection, to touch base with each other about things that might be, oh, what are you thinking about this, or what do you think this might mean for us? We also have, I guess, a range of different working groups and operational groups currently that we're all very connected to, and through those relationships also create those pathways. I guess we also have access through things like the Social Recovery Reference Group. So I'm a member on it, but we, under it, have had a few initiatives like the mentoring programs, the recent Possibility Lab for the community development officers. So some of those networks I participate in, and others are more for are more practitioners who are also participating in those. We also host an annual community recovery forum as another way of bringing together all of our stakeholders here in Queensland for professional development, but more importantly, also about connections. I personally also chair a state human and social recovery coordination group, and it is kind of made up of stakeholders across the human service sector. And as you were saying, Jamie, its intent is about coordination, but it's also recognising that not one of us holds all the answers, all the solutions, and that really any of this work is about collective and collaborative action. You will not be successful in this space as a solo flyer. It truly is about making the best use of anyone and everyone in those networks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess it's also intuitive to the operational success moving into disaster season, as we can understand how, having developed those relationships with the, people at that level in the, I want to say, gosh, peacetime, but when it's not operationally hectic and that's stating it mildly, right? I mean, we've all been there at activations when it's a little bit hairy, but I guess it's so important, and sometimes that networking, that social capital, that bonding together of individuals before the crap hits the fan, where you've got the mutual respect, the idea that everyone's on the same playing field. And it sounds as though in those conversations that you've had before the disasters happen or the disruptions happen, I'm a floating head, am I? Oh gosh, how awkward.
Yes. I was trying not to laugh.
Too funny. I guess coming back to my point is that when you are vulnerable enough to acknowledge that you're a part of a greater system, I guess, that's only going to benefit the community when these disruptors, these hazards and other things actually come into play that mean practitioners who are in charge of the money, the resources for getting the operations on the ground, things can happen quickly because of the established relationships and connections that have already been worked out. So I would wonder that you've created in an ideal world. I wonder if you might talk to the challenges that you've seen across your career when there haven't been those established relationships. And so in the absence of any social connection or network, what challenges have you come up against when trying to manage a disaster during trying to get to know people and what their motivations are?
Jamie, you are so right. I think my most favourite mantra is really that relationships and trust and, you know, knowing each other and what each other brings to the table is often some of the most critical part of what happens in this space. When it isn't there is when I think you know, you kind of experience some of the rub of, you know, it's not as easy to go, oh yes, I know you can do that, because, you know, I've got experience that if I say to you, hey, you'll do that, you'll go do it. So you're not quite as trusting, and therefore things don't flow as easy. You're also spending a lot more time I guess trying to build that relationship on the run when you're under pressure, which is, as we all know, when we're not at our best from our interpersonal skills, because we're not taking the time or having the time to really invest in getting to know and build that trust. How that can then manifest is really things don't go as smoothly. You end up with conflict in the group. People can end up stepping into each other's space, often highly unintentionally, but it can happen. So I think they're just some of the quick things, but it also tends to mean that if you're the leader in that space, you're feeling kind of a bit out on a limb because you're taking even bigger risk because you're not quite as confident that what's happening around you is as solid as you would like it.
Absolutely. And I mean, as recovery practitioners, when we talk about what happens in communities to individuals when a disaster hits and the consequent or the subsequent impacts, we know cortisol and adrenaline. But it also happens to practitioners and those that are trying to walk alongside communities and make those decisions. And I wonder if, you know, there's across the country, if there's more that we can be doing to kind of practice what we preach when we talk to communities about self-care. You've got to look after yourselves, build the networks, having those conversations. And so I'm making it a very, very tangible part that I've got a self-care plan. So instead of being like having my emergency kit and, oh gosh, what am I going to do when it gets really rough? Well, in fact, here's my self-care plan that's adaptable and flexible depending on what the disruption looks like. And I mean, I'm kind of using that as we speak, Tammy. You know, we're sitting here in Meanjin in Brisbane, in Queensland, not under restrictions like some of our colleagues present on the call and who would be watching at the recording later on who are. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how COVID has actually, and the pandemic in itself, how that's impacted, I mean, your role in community recovery and what that's meant for your day-to-day.
Certainly. And I guess on a basic level, like many agencies in each jurisdiction who'd be online and similarly volunteers, we're all, I guess, had moved to stand up to support our colleagues in health. So from my role perspective, we're coordinating the kind of human and social response. So things like the food and medicine hotlines, the ensuring we've got plans and arrangements in place across and certainly with all of our partners to look at things like social isolation, mental health, digital exclusion, etc. So all the barriers, that we know people will be experiencing as a result of the lockdown, we're seeking to mitigate through coordinating and mobilising responses. On top of that, my role looks after the Queensland Government Community Recovery Ready Reserve. In other words, we mobilise Queensland Government public servants to support the functions, including through COVID. Currently, that's around supporting the mass vaccination hubs and community vaccination hubs, but it has been an entire suite of different activities that they've undertaken across the last 18 months. At a state level, I also work with my colleagues from the planning and whole of government kind of disaster management arrangement perspective. Practically, what that has meant for me is it's a 7-day-a-week gig. It's, again, like most people online, it is about needing to try find ways to balance work, home, trying to fit in, good, healthy practices. Because as you mentioned, I am very, very conscious of the fact that we need to be looking after not just our personal fatigue, but also the fatigue of, our staff, our partners, etc., throughout this process. But on a personal level, it certainly brings its challenges. I will share with you all, I deliberately bought an Apple Watch last year so it could become my Jiminy Cricket, to make sure I was standing up, doing a certain amount of exercise, etc. It's kind of building those things. I'm an absolute lover of travel, and as we all know, that is kind of in the on hold bucket. But I decided earlier this year that I still needed to have the mental mindset of I'm still going to go travel. So I decided where I want to go and did some research and worked out what languages they speak locally, and actually enrolled myself in learning to speak Russian. And had made that my, 15 minutes a day minimum, working on that. So I guess it's my way of creating a psychological commitment to my, I am going to travel again. So it,
Tammy, you're going to have to give us something. Tammy, you're going to have to give us something now in Russian.
No pressure. No pressure.
Thank you. Добрый день. Which is the good afternoon.
Excellent. And I think what you're describing perfectly, Tammy, is what we often talk about. I mean, what Dr. Rob Gordon, one of, I want to say the Yoda of disaster recovery, but, he's just a dead set legend, and I'm the self-proclaimed leader of the Dr. Rob Gordon Appreciation Club. It really is about pleasure and leisure, and those of us who are experiencing that disruption to our continuity in our lives and our routine, it doesn't seem important to, go outside and have a walk because I need to do the thing. And it's exactly what we talk about with our communities that are under stress after a disaster or a hazard specific. And so as I said, with practicing what we preach and also having those self-care plans in place, what you also spoke about was Queensland having responded to so many different hazard-specific disruptions to our community continuity. But what I was really interested is that I wonder if there is a lot of focus, importantly, on our disaster response in particular. And I wonder if we now are appreciating, as we all, a number of us are sitting in lockdown, if it really is around community resilience is in fact the aim of the game. And And disasters and the interruptions that they have on our community continuity are just one disruptor, but it is a pandemic that is also the disruptor to our community resilience and our community continuity. And I wonder if, we look at recovery and coming out outside on the other side of this pandemic and what that might look like. How do you see a new normal? Do you see with, I want to paint this picture in a way that, because everyone has been impacted in some capacity by COVID, by lockdowns, by restrictions, by a disruption to their individual resilience and community continuity. I wonder if some of our focus and attention and investment perhaps might then be in around what those touch points are for emergency management practitioners to ensure that we've all got, trauma-informed psychological first aid training as an example, coming at it from a, what does a new normal look like? Where do the opportunities exist where we all have an understanding now of the impacts of those disruptions? I'd ask your insight on that.
Of course. So of course, because I come from a human services background, I am obviously going to have a strong lean in that space. But certainly, Jamie, as you were mentioning, the big, I guess, takeaways that I'm hoping people are kind of observing in COVID is actually the significance of social connection, and the I guess the real impact of what happens when you do disrupt that, and as you were saying, the importance around actually having a mindset about resilience and being able to adapt regardless of what a shock might be. So, COVID has brought significant impacts, from financial, from health and well-being perspectives. But most importantly, I think what we're observing is really people reacting to the notion of physical loss of connection, really. So for me, the opportunities going forward really is all about what can we do to foster that sense of social connection? What can we do to really help individuals, right through to communities, to be able to better adapt when things like this do happen? I guess I have a slight anxiety that 10 years post COVID, we might actually forget some of this experience. So part of me also says I think there's a window of that opportunity to really change our focus from response and recovery to really focusing on that more early intervention, resilience kind of space.
That's such a great way to articulate it. And coming back to resilience, and I keep thinking about what you're referring to is it is the suffering, isn't it? And it's when those disruptors happen to our community continuity, it's trying to alleviate or even prevent that suffering from happening in the beginning. Yeah. And it's increasing. When we say resilience, it's almost those adaptive capacities, those things that help a community and an individual to feel safe before or after a disaster. And I think you're right, Tammy. I think, the learnings that you have from your experience in Larry and your consequent and subsequent disasters or interruptions and disruptors that you've witnessed, it's almost like what is the knowledge platform, or what is the network that exists that actually shares this learning experience, this hard-fought wisdom. And it would be completely awful of me not to mention the program that I lead at the moment, which is the Disaster Recovery Advisors and Mentors Australia program, which is essentially talking about what you're speaking about, which is mobilising that hard-fought wisdom and experience through a kind and connecting lens with a mentor or an advisor to walk beside people. So, if you want to, contact me if you want to talk about that a little more. But what's really striking, as you say, with that window, and you and I have got the benefit, and others on this call have got the benefit of the continuity of the disasters that we have been involved in from a response and a recovery perspective. And it is then taking that experience and, I guess, in such a way, sitting so close to that suffering, how can then we tell the stories of the communities that we've worked across that can be of benefit when we look at the IPCC report, the severity and the frequency of disasters? It's unfortunately inevitable. The knowledge and experience that each of us possess is necessary to help reduce the suffering, build the resilience of individuals and communities moving forward. And I wonder, when we talk about this social connectedness, if investment really needs to be in networking like OAR, like the forum, the Community Recovery Forum that you're talking about, because what you've articulated brilliantly and then operationalized is the importance of those connections beforehand. Because it's in a sense, it's wasting time if you're having to try to build trust and rapport with someone when adrenaline's going through your mind and bugger you, I don't care about that, I need to know this. And you can be a little bit cheeky, can't you, with friends when you've gone through the vulnerable hard times together. I mean, it makes such a difference. And so whilst building roads is incredibly important, whilst building infrastructure is very important, it really does come down to the end of what is the importance and meaning that community place on those roads. It's what does it mean to those individuals? What does it mean to their sense of safety and security? And how are those investments then putting a lens to how government and other stakeholders place the importance of what they find meaning in? I mean, you and I could talk about this forever and ever in a day, couldn't we, really? And all we need is just $1 billion and we'll probably solve it all. But, maybe between our colleagues here on the call, I thank you so much. I mean, I'm really, really interested to hear from some of our other colleagues across the country, because we're a little bit Queensland centric. So I would really like to reach out to any of the other members, people on the call, if there are any other questions. Amanda, have you got anything come through that I have missed otherwise?
Yeah. So I'll try and avoid my questions. So Anne, do you want to jump in and ask your question, or would you like me to, regarding opportunities to build better local communities?
Yeah, so I mean, just thinking of post-COVID, and we keep talking about the new normal, and there's almost a sense in that we'll go back to the old normal, and I know a lot of people want to do that. But if you think about things like working from home, and the new normal is going to look quite different in relation to working from home.
Yes.
So if you think about even arts activities, the old model is the arts activities happen in the city centre and everybody goes in for the blockbuster concert, museum, exhibition, whatever. But if we're talking about building communities, building community hubs, maybe we invest in those little local performance spaces, the local choirs, music groups, art galleries, all those sorts of things, because one can pop out for one's coffee and go to the art gallery while working from home. But you wouldn't necessarily be going into the city to go to the art gallery while working from home, which was something I used to do when I worked in the city. So, if I think what I got from working in the city, it was actually being able to access all those services in the city that aren't in my suburb. But if we're all in the suburbs, we move the investment.
Yes. And I, being an old community development officer, would certainly say that is the model, that would be perfect. Was in reality, the closer, and in some communities, they do deliberately plan more from that point of view of, your employment, your shopping, your leisure, culture experiences all are in that kind of more tighter neighbourhood. So I think you're right. In the immediacy post-COVID, people are more likely to want to remain in that closer circle. And whilst I think that's the perfect and would love to see lots of community action and resilience focused work, whether it be disaster resilience or in fact, strengthening financial resilience or business resilience or whatever. I would love to see that all at that local level. I'm probably realistic, though, in my assumption that some of that won't necessarily be considered economically viable, and therefore some of the major industries, for example, may not, want to put their West End story show on at the local theatre as opposed to hundreds of people coming into a bigger crowd. So I think what I'd be suggesting is, like most things, the future's likely to be a balance of different things. I think there will need to be some very localised options, but I still think community, particularly over time, will also move back into some of those more centralised models as well. But we should always aspire to do everything at as local a level as we possibly can, because agree that the social connectors and the building that sense of local community will always be at the heart, I think, of people like myself who come from the human service space.
And Tammy, I wonder if you could touch on, because we're talking about sometimes it is literally scalability and viability for bigger organisations that want to come in this and play in the space. And I wonder if there's opportunities within the digital economy and innovations that exist online now that we've, accessing 10 minutes. Oh gosh, I could talk forever. Have you got another 4 hours or no? I wonder if there are others. I wonder if there are others who could come into this space in terms of the digital innovation, who wouldn't even think to come and play in the human social space, but actually have a really key part to play in us being able to scale our care bearness.
Yeah, and look, I actually think during COVID we've actually seen our sector probably really pivot from the face-to-face, service base, even some of the telephone base, into a lot more of the virtual and digital space. So I think there's already been some movement of traditional players into being able to operate differently. But again, there is fabulous opportunity, I think, for that COVID has created by opening the door to, we could do things differently. And the trick around that, though, is making sure we have the strategy to balance that so that people who are digitally, if I could get the word out, excluded, have avenues to still access. So again, I very excited because I do think we could see some really different space and how digital could be used in our space. And one day we'll get to the point that, I'm aspiring to, which is I one day want the beam in Scotty moments, but, that's probably a few years off.
I wonder, sorry to interrupt you, Tammy, really quickly, and Amanda makes a beautiful point that I really want to touch on but quickly before we wrap up around what do we need to scale? No. Back to Jamie's point. Why does everything need to be scalable? It sometimes gets in the way of doing anything. And as we say, a million pockets of magic don't need to be scaled. 100% agree. I couldn't agree more. But what I'm seeing is if we're saying that everyone has a part to play, and I'm happy to argue this with you, Amanda, by the way, if we're saying,
let's go, Jamie.
Yeah, let's do it. Sorry, don't mind us, Tam. If we're saying that everyone has a part to play in the resilience and support and recovery of each other, I take your point, Amanda. It's always, and Tammy's especially, it's always has to be locally led and coordinated. But I feel like there are opportunities that are international or in other states who want to help, and they want to put their support somewhere. And in a lot of cases that ends up being a donation to a particular request for financial support, Red Cross or Lord Mayor's or whatever it might be. But I wonder, in the absence of funding, I was almost seeing where, like what Give It does, with there's a need that needs in a physical sense. In some ways, there's an individual need, and maybe it's not government that has the answer. Maybe it's not the existing stakeholders in the disaster management recovery space. So maybe it's a digital one, maybe it's not. What's the solution that says, here's the suffering and the thing that we need to keep our community safe? And in the absence of government knowing how to respond to that, where are the other players, and what do we need to have that need met, is what I meant.
Yeah, and I quickly will add that I actually do think we have seen some of that play internationally, where you have seen, the Googles and some of those step in more probably in some of the impact assessment spaces, where they've worked with local community members on ground who have been able to, do the snap, here's some impact, feed it in, which disaster management, people have then been able to use, for identifying where needs, etc. are. So I do think there are, but I want to balance that with, it still needs to be, as you were saying, something that's identified as a need, by the communities, rather than it seems like a great idea.
Yeah.
But a community will not want.
Here we go. We're going to recover you. Look at this. Anti-recovery, right? Yeah. I want to thank you so much for your time, Tammy. I'm very conscious that there's 5 minutes left. And I mean, we could talk about this forever and ever in a day, couldn't we? And I want to really take it back to, if I hand back to Amanda, if there's any other questions about what, if anyone else wants to ask Tammy while she's here, before the inevitable, I don't want to say inevitable lockdown, but before your role gets affected by any COVID pandemic responses. Anything that anyone would like to ask Tammy while they've got her? Please take off your camera, unmute yourself, ask the question. Don't be afraid. I could talk forever, so I mean, I will.
No. Come on, Ruth, you've got a question. I can see it. I can see you. It's permeating in your head.
Even if it's a thought, a comment.
No, we have to hear it.
That's better. Look, I've been just so impressed with the energy and enthusiasm and the inquiring minds of everybody with us today. And part of what I've been thinking as listening to you as you're struggling with different issues is, as we're talking about resilience, thinking we need to actually define what we're thinking about in the particular context. What is resilience in this context? And what are the factors in this community, in this situation, that are inherent to the community, that are providing the community resilience, that are actually embedded in the community, so that in our role we protect that space, that way of functioning, and if is needed, provide support to strengthen the already existing resilience, and then with the community identify where the vulnerabilities are, and they may be actually islands of vulnerabilities, and there may be other islands in the community that are resilience, that can provide internally the resilience that is required to meet the existing vulnerability. So in working with the strengths and the vulnerabilities within the community to help them balance each other and work together, which will ultimately strengthen the community and leave a legacy within recovery of a strengthened. But I think we need to have, us as service providers need to have a mindset where we identify what we are thinking about as resilience, and working with the community to identify what they define resilience at, and what they want to support that. And picking up from what has come through so much today is the importance of stepping back and learning from past experience. You've spoken so eloquently, all of you today, about Amy and then about previous disasters and other people, so that time and energy and precious money isn't deployed reinventing the wheel. So at the beginning of each disaster, it's really worth stepping back for a moment. You don't have to rush in immediately. Step back, do the research, talk to people to understand what is already known, so that the service providers can step up at a high level, rather than going through the pain, the struggle, the angst, the energy sapping processes of reinventing the wheel. So there we are. I'll leave it at that for a moment. But,
Chris is
congratulations, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That is just so wonderful to hear. And I know that Chris wants something to say. We're kind of trying desperately to hold our tongue because we both desperately want to talk about the Disaster Recovery Mentor Program that she is one of the steering committee members of, and is also one of the first mentors of the program, which is essentially mobilising that hard-fought wisdom between her and Steve Pascoe and Anne Leadbeater and Sarah Ubrien and Dr. Kate Brady. It's essentially, they've got the, I want to say, advantage or the benefit of that undeniable credibility that comes with the lived experience and that hard-fought wisdom. Chris, is there something that you wanted to talk to real quick?
Thanks, Tammy. Yes, I mean, Tammy is absolutely right. We have networks, informal and formal, and there is the reality of being able to listen directly to community, as Ruth said, about what it is that they need. What do they want? Not what the recovery system is willing to give them, but actually the need, and that's often, you know, an individual, a family, a street, a village in our case level. So, you know, one of the reasons that Red Cross and bless Andrew and Kate and John Richardson for taking on this role, one of the reasons Drama was established was to say, well, why should we, after every major event or incident or disaster, throw away the hard-fought, as Jamie calls it, you know, experience and wisdom of people on the ground in the community? Why not use them as mentors to encourage and support the instinctive reactions? Usually my experience is people know what needs to be done on the ground. They just need someone to say, you're on the right track. Don't stop. Don't let the system overcome you. Get on with it. You know, we're behind you. We're here to support. And it's just that kind of, you know, it's often just an hour and a half's conversation on the phone with someone to go, yep, you pointed in the right direction. Keep going. We're behind you. If you need us for anything else, give us a call. If it's a longer term relationship, you know, Jamie is there to help connect people together as mentors and mentees, but it's just to support each other as humans in this really complex, challenging relationship. And it seems as though forever we've learned the lesson and then completely forgotten them, and somebody has to start again from scratch, and that's pointless. So yeah,
I think I'm going to have to call an end to the conversation because we do promise people that we'll stop at 6. But Jamie, have you got any final comments?
Probably just to say, agree entirely. That resource of someone who is your scaffold, your guidance, and you know, someone who is kind of there to, as you said, just give you that little, you know, it's okay, keep going, you're on the right track, because it is tough work, and you know, it sometimes you're making, you know, really tough decisions, and will just feel so isolated out there, kind of on a limb. So to have that kind of, you know, someone who's just there, who's got the experience and can just say it's all right, you're going to get through, is critical.
Absolutely. And thank you so, so much to Tammy and everyone who's joined us. I hope this is not the end of the conversation. Gosh, I could talk for hours, as I said, but I shall be stopped because Amanda's about to turn the camera off. So again, thank you all so, so much for joining. And please, would love your feedback on the LinkedIn page, in our newsletter. Feed it back to the OR team. I think these conversations are becoming apparent that it's almost a brain's trust in terms of the challenges that are faced in our different jurisdictions, different organisations, different time, etc. We've got a hand in helping each other. So, and I think the OR network, that's the beauty of this space, is that we're all women wanting to help each other and leverage those experiences and relationships, so we all just suffer a little less. But until next time, thank you so much for joining us for the August conversations with the Australasian Women in Emergencies Network. Everyone keep safe, keep well, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you. Enjoy your cake, Kath. Bye.
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 Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.